Thank you. All right, so we are in Joshua chapters 14 through 18. We're just going to back up a little bit to get a running start. We only made it really through about chapter 14. I feel like I'm super loud. All right, so in chapter 14, we have the beginning of the chapter talking about the division of land to the 9.5 tribes that are west of the Jordan. And I'll just mention the passage I was looking for, and Chase was trying gently to kind of guide me back towards on Sunday, which I appreciate. Deuteronomy chapter 29. We had discussed briefly about how Moses had come into the conversation with the division of land. And of course, before they crossed the Jordan, Moses had led them up through Moab, where they ended before he passed away. They had already captured that land, and Moses had given that land on the east of the Jordan to the 2.5 tribes. And so now in chapter 14, how was it that they had decided who would get what? Now that Joshua they've gone in and they've fought for years and they've captured land, how did it get decided whose land or which land would belong to which tribe? By lot. They cast lots. Where did they do it? Do you remember where they were? They were at Gilgal, if I remember correctly, but more specifically, they were at the door of the tabernacle. So they brought them by tribes before the door of the tabernacle, and Moses had given instructions about how this would be done once they got to that point. And now my clicker won't advance. Thank you. So this question again, why no land for the sons of Levi? As before, no land for the sons of Levi east of the Jordan. That was mentioned also in Deuteronomy 29. But in Joshua 14, why no land for the sons of Levi? No inheritance for them is what the word said. The Lord is their inheritance. Yep, and so there's a special relationship there for Levi, a special duty, a special role for them to fulfill. So they would go on to be given territory within all of the other tribes, and 48 cities. 6 of the cities were cities of refuge. And so all that is being decided there in the first part of chapter 14. Click, 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 click. All right, and then in verses 6 through 15, we talked about on Sunday how Caleb, a very faithful older man, one of the original spies, comes and asks for his inheritance. And we had that, he does a little bit of math there in front of Joshua and says, it's already been 45 years since that promise was made, and I am now 85, and I'm as strong as I ever was for going in or for going out, for fighting. And so we've got the account of Caleb. I wonder if I have to stand right here in order to do it. He also defeated 3 of the Anakim, right? 3 of those giant men, the race of giants, race of very large fighting people, in order to claim Hebron, which was where his inheritance would be. And, all right. He said, "Behold, the Lord has let me live, just as he spoke these 45 years from the time the Lord spoke this word to Moses when Israel walked in the wilderness. And now, behold, I am 85 years old today." All right, and so here is a look again at a section of that territory. It's not the whole territory, but here you have the Moabite side of the river. You have Mount Nebo, Mount Pisgah right here around the place where they crossed the Jordan. And then here's Jericho, and there's Gilgal. So that's where the kind of everything began. Gad and Manasseh is up even further. Reuben have land over here. Manasseh's going to go on and have more land, as we'll see. And we talked about this question about how long should a faithful servant wait for their reward? What's a reasonable amount of time for a man of faith or a woman of faith to wait for what God has promised them? As long as it takes, right? And so, but Caleb remembered what God had promised him, and God had promised him his inheritance while he was alive. So I think it's interesting, and I think it's significant. Caleb remembered God's promises, and he counted God faithful all that time. Not only that, he was still very zealous, and I think it's important to note he did not expect to go in and just have it be handed to him, right? He was prepared to go in and fight for it, and he does. All right. I want to read to you a little bit from, I have a couple of sections. This book is called The Heart of Hebrew History, a study of the Old Testament, and it was from my grandfather's library. I was able to inherit some of his books after he had passed, and this is one of the ones that I got. And so I'm going to read to you this little section, make sure I got the right one. The northern part of their land must now be wrested from the natives. Near the lake of Galilee lived Jabin, the strong king of Hazor, who had summoned several other local chiefs to form a confederacy against Joshua's army. Upon hearing of this, Joshua set forth with his army to meet them in battle. He came upon them as they encamped near the small lake called Merom, in the northern end of the land. In this battle, the northern kings were utterly defeated, and their cities were possessed by the forces of Joshua. This victory was decisive. It led to the conquest of all northern Palestine and gave to the Hebrews possession of much of western Palestine. All right. So then the land had rest from war, it says at the very end of the chapter. Anybody have any thoughts about that? Or why that might be significant?
God was with them, and they knew as long as they were following the oracles of God.
Yep. Not one of among them will stand before you, right? And so there was going to come a time where the fighting was over, and they had some time to enjoy the blessings. All right, chapter 15, the first 12 verses detail all of the land that Judah is given. Significance of Judah, obviously it's the line of David, the line of Christ. Many other important individuals that we've discussed and talked about would also fall within that tribe of Judah. We also read there where Caleb goes and claims his city. And then he goes to Debir, which was Kiriath Sefer, and he offers his daughter, Aksa, as a wife to whoever will go and capture Debir. Interesting incentive, don't you think? So we talked at the very end of class on Sunday about what might that have been like for Aksa, and if you were her, what would you be thinking about what your future might be here shortly? Obviously, it was a very different time, a very different culture, and yet we're going to hear a little bit more from Achsah. But verse 17 tells us that Othniel, a name that we will continue to read about as we go through Judges, he's Caleb's nephew, right? The son of Caleb's brother. He goes, captures Debir, and claims Achsah, his cousin, as his wife. And I'll find my spot where I can click. This is the weirdest thing. And it has a full battery, too. In verse 18 of chapter 15, she says, "And it came about that when she came to him, that is Othniel, son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, she persuaded him to ask her father for a field. So she alighted from the donkey, and Caleb said to her, 'What do you want?' And then she said, 'Give me a blessing. Since you have given to me the land of the Negev, give me also springs of water.' So he gave her the upper springs and the lower springs." What do you think about that? Any thoughts about that request or?
Water was extremely valuable.
Yes. And what is the land that Caleb had given to Othniel and to Achsah? You've given me the Negev, which means what? I know some of you know what that means. What does the word Negev mean? It's the south country, which is a desert, right? South of Hebron there was a desert country. It's dry. And so, go ahead.
Isn't that basically the wilderness where they had been wandering for years?
That would be more on the east side. They'd been through there before, but that country kind of extending down towards Egypt, it is a dry country, and we've seen too the kind of the topography of the land. So that could be in that higher mountainous region. It's dry, and so one resource that I found says that. Yeah, Judges 1 tells us this is the very same thing, word for word. I think I figured it out. It will not let me change slides. I can advance through the slides. I cannot change the slides. I'll read another section here in a moment. But if we look at this is Hebron, which is Caleb's inheritance. So we're talking about this area down here. There's not a lot down there. Not a lot of cities. Don't see any rivers here. And so what she says is, the request is both daring and savvy. Her question holds Caleb responsible for where she will live in the world. After all, he's the one who decided to marry her to Othniel, and he himself has settled in this place. The region around Hebron was not actually in the wilderness region of the Negev. That was a desert area to the south, yet it was dry and desert-like in places. Achsah recognized that if she and her husband and their future family were to thrive, they would need access to water. Any thoughts about that? If your father had just married you off to this person who was willing to go out and capture a city, for him, and he received an inheritance, she receives an inheritance through him, and then she goes right back to dad and says, or to her husband first, "You need to go ask my dad. You need to go ask him for a blessing. He needs to give us more than this." To me, it seems a little bit bold. But I don't see any reason to think that she was out of line for doing it. But it is interesting, and I like this perspective that recognize this. She really was holding her father responsible. If you're going to be responsible for, deciding who I'm going to marry and where I'm going to live, at least give me something to make this easier. That's what I kind of get from that. Any other thoughts? All right. Verse 21 through the whole rest of the chapter, all the way through verse 62, really details then all of the cities and all of the land. And we're not going to go through and read all of that. But some very remarkable cities and territories that were given to the tribe of Judah. Interestingly, I think, in verse 63 at the end of that list, it says, "Now as for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the sons of Judah could not drive them out. So the Jebusites live with the sons of Judah at Jerusalem until this day." That made me think. That just made me think. If God is with them, and if they are supposed to conquer and claim this land, how could the sons of Judah not drive out the Jebusites? Maybe I'm reaching just a little bit too much, but it seems to me that we've already seen a little bit of a pattern that might answer the question a little bit. Why could they not drive out the Jebusites?
I think their faith may have been wavering.
That's kind of what I thought. Is it cannot or would not? Is it, or both, right? Is it they tried and they failed because maybe God wasn't with them? Was it a faith problem? Was it an obedience problem? But it seems to me like from what we've seen, if God wanted them to drive out the Jebusites, and if they were faithful to God's will, they'd have driven out the Jebusites. Just something I think it's interesting to think about. Yes, sir.
They did not drive them out until David came, and that established Jerusalem. So
David City.
the time that was a long time that
Yeah.
they existed there.
And Jerusalem had been around for a long time, right? It was a very ancient city already by, at that time. Right. Salem. Yeah. All right. So then we come to chapter 16, the lot for the sons of Joseph. And so in verse 9 of chapter 16, it says, "Together with the cities which were set apart for the sons of Ephraim, in the midst of the inheritance of the sons at Manasseh, all the cities with their villages." And that's what has been detailed. Why was there... Boy, I'm really, really struggling with this clicker. Let me get through the map. I'm going to go back to Genesis chapter 48 if you would like to go along for a minute. But I want us to think about why does Joshua chapter 16 read the way it does when it talks about the inheritance for the sons of Joseph. Genesis chapter 48 reads, "Now it came about after these things that Joseph was told, 'Behold, your father is sick.' So he took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. When it was told to Jacob, 'Behold, your son Joseph has come to you,' Israel collected his strength and sat up in the bed. Then Jacob said to Joseph, 'God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And he said to me, Behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I will make you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession. And now your 2 sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine.'" Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. But your offspring that have been born after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the names of their brothers in their inheritance. Now as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died to my sorrow in the land of Canaan on the journey, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, "Who are these?" And Joseph said to his father, "They are my sons, whom God has given me here." So he said, "Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were so dim from age that he could not see. Then Joseph brought them close to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face. And behold, God has let me see your children as well." Then Joseph took them from his knees and bowed with his face to the ground. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right, and brought them close to him. But Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, "The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and may my name live on in them, and the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and may they grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on Ephraim's head, it displeased him, and he grasped his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." And he blessed them that day, saying, "By you Israel shall pronounce blessing, saying, May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. All right, that was a lengthy section, but it's interesting, I think, then, as we consider what has happened. If we could go to the next slide, please, because I don't think I can. Why isn't there a tribe of Joseph with its own territory? That was interesting, isn't it? That Israel said, "Ephraim and Manasseh are mine." There were 12, right? There were 12 sons. Seems like there's already enough. And yet he says, "Your sons, these two, they will be mine." Just like Reuben and Simeon, who were his two firstborn, or his first two sons. Significance there?
I think it's going to show what Ephraim's going to become the king tribe of the northern kingdom.
Mhm.
So they have the ability to be a leader among God's chosen. They choose
Yeah.
to serve idols, but they are the king tribe of the northern kingdom.
Sure.
Is often referred to as Ephraim, especially in Hosea and other places. So they were, and as you look at this, you asked earlier about why Levi was scattered. They weren't scattered because they were priests. They were scattered as a curse in Genesis 49, along with Simeon because of the Dinah incident
Yeah.
in Genesis 32. That curse became a blessing because of the golden calf, and they then became priests and were scattered. Simeon would be scattered, we're going to see in chapter 18, if
Yeah.
you ever heard of again, because they're cursed, they never changed.
Right. Yeah, so there were some things that precluded other sons of Israel from being named as possessors of their own territory. And so Ephraim and Manasseh would take that position. I think it's significant, of course, because of what we know of Joseph as a type of Christ, right? A deliverer, very obedient. And through Joseph, there was a lot of deliverance, not only at that time, but obviously then later. Also interesting, I think, an interesting parallel, because Israel himself was the second born, correct? And so we see that model kind of being replicated again, where the blessing is given to the second son and not the first son. All right. So again, as Steve just mentioned, there was also no land for Simeon, which Simeon was the avenger of Dinah, the sister who was raped. Simeon is given a place to live within Judah. One other thing I thought was interesting about that, perhaps, is because of the role of Judah. Judah is it is a large territory, it's a large tribe, it's a very prominent tribe. Obviously, the one through whom the original blessing to Abraham would come true. And I just kind of thought it was maybe an interesting coincidence that Judah is the tribe that is kind of seen maybe as in a redemptive light for Simeon. Simeon not having their territory or not having an inheritance of their own. And again, Levi being dispersed throughout. So I want to take us back for a minute to this theme that we have for this entire study about success comes from following God. And I want to talk, I'd love to hear from you about connecting Joseph to that. We already talked about, mentioned Caleb and how long-serving he was and how zealous for God he was. 85 years old when he gets his inheritance, 45 years waiting for it. What about Joseph? Can we connect Joseph to this theme of success comes from following God in light of the inheritance that his sons receive? What thoughts do you have?
That was his life, of faith. He didn't know what the outcome would be. He became a prisoner, a slave, and a prisoner, and then, every time that he was struck down, he remained faithful, and at the end of his life, toward the end of his time, he would say that you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good to save many lives.
Yep.
So he was just like Jesus, mistreated in the role of the Savior.
Always trusted that God had something better in store. Not even necessarily calculating, anything for himself, or not suspecting that he would necessarily benefit, which of course he really did. But I think when you look at the big picture, and we were just having a conversation this afternoon at dinner with our friends. We were talking a little bit about this idea of families where there is a faith, families who are strong, families who go on, where their children and generations after them are strong and believe and are faithful. If success comes from following God, we already know that defeat comes from disobedience. Look at the impact, look at the power generationally of Joseph's faith, of Joseph's obedience. Not only in his own lifetime, and not even only in the lives of his sons, but here it is 80 some odd years, 60 some odd years after Joseph's sons are born, and that Joseph could be seen as the one who is successful, I think, in this inheritance. Other thoughts about that? All right. Does God define success differently than you or I do? We know he does. What we think of as what success looks like, God's really not interested in, for the most part. God doesn't care what kind of house you live in. He doesn't care what country you live in. He doesn't care about any of that. He doesn't care what clothes you wear. He doesn't care what car you drive or what you do for a living. What matters is obedience. What matters is faith. What matters is subjection, right? That's what God looks at as success. Standing for something, standing for God. Yes, sir.
Well, Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, he said, if a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, and his soul is not satisfied with goodness, better is still born than he.
Mm-hmm.
That if you're not satisfied with goodness and serving God, then
Yeah.
it would be better off if you weren't.
Yeah. And I think we all could look around and see people, even within our own families, examples of people who are not satisfied with God's goodness. They don't see that as success. They don't see obedience. They don't see a faithful life lived. They don't see that as success. What a pity. But look at what it does for somebody like Joseph. And look what a legacy that is. Look what it does for someone like Caleb or Joshua. We admire people who are successful like Joseph. I think there's a problem, though, for a lot of us. We don't want to do what Joseph did. Or we admire people like Caleb. And I think, at 85, I don't know that I want to be out slaying any giants. Right? We admire people who do these big things and who are successful, and yet we often don't want to do what it is that they did to see that success. Right?
I was going to say, of course, we know that in Matthew 6:33, seek ye first the kingdom of God. And it's so similar to what we're seeing here. The previous verses, he'll give us rest in the way of no anxieties or stresses,
Yeah.
not trying to strive for the fruitless efforts of the world.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Just some things I thought were interesting. Chapter 17, Manasseh's sons receive their portion. So remember that we had Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh on the east side of the river already settled. Now we have West Manasseh receiving its portion, and it's large. It's huge. Verses 3 and 4. We see there are 5 daughters of Zelophehad, the great-great-great-grandson of Joseph. And if you want to look there in chapter 17, verses 3 and 4, it says, however, Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, had no sons. So Zelophehad had no sons, only daughters. And these are the names of his daughters: Mahlah and Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. And they came near before Eleazar the priest, and before Joshua the son of Nun, and before the leaders, saying, the Lord commanded Moses to give us an inheritance among our brothers. So according to the command of the Lord, he gave them an inheritance among their father's brothers. And we read that. So there fell 10 portions to Manasseh besides the land of Gilead and Bashan, which is beyond the Jordan, because the daughters of Manasseh received an inheritance among his sons. Interesting, don't you think? I think that's the only time we read about the land being given to women and not to fathers of families or fathers of tribes. But because they were of that line, they were blessed. Verses 5 through 11, then the remainder of the land that was given to Manasseh and Ephraim, the towns that they held in other territories are detailed. The sons of Manasseh can't drive out the Canaanites. There we have that again. I wonder if that's a similar situation to what happened where Judah wasn't able to drive out the Jebusites. They do, however, force them into slavery, and that's verse 13. But it does make you wonder, after all you read about the victory that they had, when it says they couldn't drive them out, I'm pretty sure if God was with them, they'd have done it. But that's just me thinking that through. All right, can we have the next slide, please? All right, so let's go back real quick. So here's kind of a zoomed out view. So Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, you've got then West Manasseh over here, all the way from the river, all the way over to the Mediterranean Sea. Ephraim down here, and then here's Shiloh, and that's going to be really important. Judah has this whole territory, which includes Hebron's kind of in the middle, actually almost more to the north. Simeon just kind of has some, a place to roam, within Judah. But all this technically is Judah. And then we've got the others coming up. All right. So in chapter 17, verses 14 through 18, what is happening and why? Then the sons of Joseph spoke to Joshua, saying, "Why have you given me only one lot and one portion for an inheritance, since I am a numerous people whom the Lord has thus far blessed?" And Joshua said to them, "If you are a numerous people, go up to the forest and clear a place for yourselves there in the land of the Perizzites and of the Rephaim, since the hill country of Ephraim is too narrow for you." And the sons of Joseph said, "The hill country is not enough for us, and all the Canaanites who live in the valley land have chariots of iron, both those who are in Bethshean and its towns, and those who are in the valley of Jezreel." And Joshua spoke to the house of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, saying, "You are a numerous people and have great power. You shall not have one lot only, but the hill country shall be yours. For though it is a forest, you shall clear it, and to its farthest borders it shall be yours, and you shall drive them out. You shall drive out the Canaanites, even though they have chariots of iron, and they are strong." So what's going on? We need more room. Don't fence me in. This is not enough territory. We've got a lot of people here. So Joshua says, go. Take it. Claim it. Knock down the forest. Clear as much land as you need. Go do it. And in so doing, there are additional blessings realized by Joseph, in a sense. So he sends them out to clear the land, and he blesses them. He says, you will have success if you go and do this. Does it start to sound like these people have forgotten what happened about 5 years before? It sounds to me like they've kind of forgotten how this worked, how God set this up. So let me read from this book again. I'm going to read another section. In another connection, we have spoken of the various pagan tribes which occupied Canaan at the time of the conquest. Of these peoples, the Canaanites were the most powerful. With them, more than any others, the Hebrews were involved in the next century. They were a cruel, fierce-fighting people whose moral and religious practices were exceptionally wicked and repulsive. The biblical account, Leviticus and Deuteronomy, tells something of these abominable practices. The discoveries of the archaeologists have given the most impressive corroboration to the biblical record. The work of Dr. McAllister at Ancient Gezer, Canaanite city, was especially revealing. Uncovering this ancient mound layer by layer, he came upon the stratum belonging to the time of Joshua. Here he found the high place, the area where the Canaanites carried on their worship. It was therefore one of the Canaanite high places. It contained 10 monoliths or upright pillars the tallest of which was 10 feet 9 inches and the lowest 5 feet 7 inches. These pillars ran in a curved line in the general direction north and south. And basically what it says is this whole area was a place for newborn sacrifice. So that's the kind of people that they were unable to drive out. People who are engaged in that kind of worship. So we can try to catch this up on Sunday, but chapter 18 is about Shiloh, and we'll begin with this question on Sunday morning. So for Sunday then, if you would read chapters 19 through the end of the book, and that's what we will look at next week. Thank you.